the Consulate General of India in South Africa, Dr. Thelma John David, and members of her diplomatic corps, our keynote speaker, Professor Tsepo Madlingozi, members of our university executive and our acting dean of research, the members of the Senate, academics in the university, students in the university, our online guests, and ladies and gentlemen, and friends of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center. It gives me great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to our annual Phyllis Naidoo Memorial Lecture. We have a wonderful lineup arranged for you, and we hope that you will enjoy fully in these proceedings and come out feeling enlightened after the discussions of today. To commence with this program, I have great pleasure in welcoming our Acting Dean of Research, Professor Neil Kubanali, to do the formal welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Serban. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, members of the executive, esteemed members of the Senate, dedicated academics and professional staff and students, and a special mention to the Consul General of India, Dr. Thelma David. Very welcome. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, who cannot be with us today, it is my honor to formally welcome you to the Dr. Phyllis Naidoo Memorial Lecture this evening. We are particularly privileged to have Commissioner Tsepo Madlingozi as our keynote speaker, along with the family and friends of the late Dr. Naidoo, and members of the advisory board of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center. I would also like to acknowledge the veterans in the struggle for South African freedom who are with us today, the SRC leadership, fellow students, industry representatives, political and business leaders, alumni, and media colleagues. Your presence here reflects the collective commitment to honoring Dr. Naidoo's legacy and advancing the dialogue on human rights and social justice. As we gather in remembrance of Dr. Naidoo, it is essential to highlight the rich resources available to us through our various special collections. The Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, the Alan Paton Struggle Archive, the Center for African Literacy, and the Killy Campbell Library each house invaluable information about key figures in our history. These collections are a treasure trove of stories of struggle, conquest, and freedom, often compiled through the efforts of family members, researchers, and historians who have meticulously gathered pieces of our past. Unfortunately, many of our local students and staff are not utilizing these resources as fully as international visitors. I encourage each of you to explore these materials and engage with the histories they hold. Every time we host this lecture, we participate in a masterclass learning from the insights of scholars and thought leaders who share their knowledge and experience with us. I have no doubt that today's lecture will offer us valuable lessons that will resonate deeply. I want to assure you that the executive management of the university, our library teams, and the board of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center wholeheartedly support this event. They recognize the significance of the discussions we engage in, understanding that this intellectual journey is crucial for our growth and understanding of our shared history. Finally, let us remember that the life and legacy of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo are preserved and celebrated here at the Westville campus in the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center and beyond. Thank you all for being here, and let us look forward to a meaningful and inspiring evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kubanali. My name is Vishal Serban, and I am an academic in the School of Law on the Howard College campus. I'm going to just ask your indulgence for 10 minutes whilst I introduce our keynote speaker And also, I would like to give a very short biography of Phyllis Naidoo. I had the pleasure of meeting Phyllis Naidoo when I was a high school student, and I did a history course. And we had an oral history project, and our school principal invited Phyllis Naidoo. And one of the things that she told us at that time, which I remember quite vividly some years later, was that from her early years, her experiences did not allow her to take things simply for granted. When she was 10 years old, her father took her to an Institute of Race Relations conference in Pietermaritzburg, at which she was to serve tea. At the meeting, someone told her to go and call the boy. She went outside and asked for the boy, and a very dignified, traditional Zulu woman confronted her and said that the boy you want is my husband. And the woman's regal presence made Phyllis realize that she had given a tremendous offense, and she was quite mortified. She was so upset that she sobbed hysterically for a long while afterwards. And this incident awakened in her, more than any event or speech at the meeting, to the evils of racism. She was sent to the King George V Hospital to train as a TB nurse, and she was inspired by work by Reverend Paul Sykes and his wife, who had worked for FOSA. And surrounded constantly by such suffering, Phyllis desperately wanted to do something more to counteract the evils of TB. This was when Reverend Sykes made her aware of the conditions in South Africa that gave rise to the disease. That time period, 1946, was also the time of the passive resistance in Durban. Phyllis was filled with admiration for the passive resistors. She decided that she had to take an active part in bringing about change. A teacher by day and an evening class student at this Natal University, the then non-European section, Phyllis organized a human rights committee at the university and helped raise funds for the 1964 treason trialists and their families. Phyllis joined the Natal Indian Congress, where he met Nanda Naidoo, George Supersad, Dr. Randuri, M.D. Naidoo, and became involved in writing speeches for her comrades. In 1958, she married M.D. Naidoo, a committed member of the South African Communist Party. And in 1961, she joined the South African Communist Party. She began working with Dorothy Nyembe, Florence Mkhize, Moses Kotane, who were challenging the Bantu Education Act that had effectively lowered the standard of education for African people. It was in this cause that she made her first political speech at the YMCA. In 1958, she began working with her husband and Govan Mbeki in aiding people in working in the underground. There they made deliveries, helping those in danger to get out of the country. She herself took Moses Mabhida and two other comrades to Newcastle when they were making their way out of South Africa. In 1961, after the banning of political organizations, the Umkhonto we Sizwe came into being. At this time, Billy Nair, a trade unionist and a member of the MK, was on the run from the police, and she helped him hide from their attention. Phyllis's flat in Durban was a meeting place for many who were actively involved in the liberation struggle. When Chief Albert Luthuli was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1961, Moses Kotane, Duma Nokwe, Govan Mbeki, together with Phyllis, jointly wrote their initial acceptance for the chief. Phyllis was banned in March 1966, and in 1967, her husband was charged and sent to prison on Robben Island. She continued her work underground, assisting comrades to flee into exile and providing support for their families and those of the detainees. Her banning orders were renewed with house arrest until 1976. During the 10-year period of her banning, her home was raided 14 times. When people who had been released from Robben Island gathered around Phyllis, who tried to find employment for them while they were returning home. Many could not find work because they were afraid people were afraid to employ ex-political prisoners. At one stage, she had 5 ex-Robben Island detainees as messengers in her law firm. Amongst these was Jacob Zuma. The only option for these men was to flee the country. With the help of Joseph and Thuli, she established a new escape route to Swaziland, and her comrade Shadrach Mapamulo was able to take many out of the country to safety. In 1977, Phyllis escaped to Lesotho as her underground comrades were detained. She joined the ANC and was involved in welfare work, providing for the children who left South Africa, assisting members of the SACP and the ANC to escape South Africa, and provided them with support in Lesotho. At the time, Phyllis was working with Reverend John Osmers, and in 1979, a parcel bomb was sent to Reverend Osmers, and when he opened it, his hand was blown off, and Phyllis and 4 others were seriously injured. She was forced to leave Lesotho in 1983 when the South African government began airstrikes against Lesotho. South Africa wanted her out of Lesotho and warned the Lesotho government that she would be killed. She had 24 hours to make her escape, and on the 9th of September 1983, Phyllis fled and months later arrived in Zimbabwe. She remained in Harare for 7 years, where she continued her political activities for the MK, wrote speeches for her comrades. She campaigned against the abuse of power by the apartheid government. She was particularly concerned with the prisoners, both political and criminal, on death row. In 1990, Phyllis finally returned to South Africa from exile, and immediately she went to visit the prisoners on death row and Robben Island. She continued to write, and she was engaged in recording the history of the struggle as she experienced it during her time in the country and in exile. In 2003, the South African government conferred the Order of Luthuli in silver on Phyllis for her outstanding contribution to human rights and the struggle against apartheid. Phyllis passed away in February 2013 in Durban. To deliver the annual Phyllis Naidoo address, the center is very honored to have Professor Tshepo Madlingozi. Tshepo is a commissioner of the South African Human Rights Commission. He grew up in Bloemfontein in Mangaung in the 1980s during a very troubling, revolutionary, and violent period in South Africa's history. And that's where he came into consciousness. And I think that one of the first words that he learned in English that he engaged with as a child was the word power. And it was there where he learned that it came to signify the people's power prominently. His mother was a nurse, and his father was a mine worker. He rarely saw his father, having only returned a few times in the year from work in the mines. And during his childhood, he witnessed domestic violence and rampant unemployment in townships. He narrated a story where his grandfather had worked for a company, and his grandmother commented one day that his grandfather did not bring home a wage, to which his grandfather replied that he would be paid in a lump sum. And when that time came to receive the lump sum, the employer showed him receipts that were supposedly signed by his grandfather to show that he received his monthly wage. His grandfather, however, was illiterate and left without recourse. Like Phyllis, these injustices that Tshepo witnessed as a child shaped him and forged what was to lie in his career. At high school, he first learned about the new constitution and was excited about this development and all the hope and promise that it offered for our country. He studied for his LLB at the University of Pretoria, and working within the NGO space led him to pursue a master's in sociology in Cameroon. The topic of his thesis was critical race theory and its application in Africa. His studies revealed to him the gaps and the limits of the law, and he received a PhD from the University of London. His research interests include the constitutional implications of settler colonization, decolonial critiques of transitional justice, African literature and the law, and abolitionist social movements. He was a director for the Center for Applied Legal Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand and an associate professor at that same school, where he taught social justice and human rights. He is a research associate at the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education at Nelson Mandela University and a visiting professor at the Institute for Social Studies of Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He is a co-editor for the South African Journal on Human Rights, a co-editor for Symbol or Substance, Socio-Economic Rights in South Africa, and co-editor for the Introduction to Law and Legal Skills volume in South Africa. Now, as a law academic myself, his writings play a prominent role in lectures to first-year students, so we're very grateful for that. He sits on many boards, the Rural Democracy Trust, Imbiza, a journal of African writing, the Africa Ikalafe Spiritual Health Institute, and the Institute for Social Dialogue. He's a member of the steering committee of the African Coalition for Corporate Accountability and a member of the advisory board for the Health Justice Initiative. For 13 years, he worked with and for the Kulumani Support Group, a 120,000 strong social movement for victims and survivors of apartheid, as a national advocacy coordinator and later its chairperson. So I've asked for a 10-minute indulgence, and I'm grateful that you have given me that. And so now, with further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the professor and let him know that he is a friend to this university and this is a home to you. So we look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, what an introduction. It shows that we leave a lot of things online and we should be careful what is out there. I first want to recognize the Consulate General of India, Dr. Davis, and your team, the DVC, acting DVC of Research, the board of the Luthuli Gandhi Documentation Center, our provincial manager from the South African Human Rights Commission, Padiachi, and all of you protocol observed, as we say, all protocol observed. I've got a little bit of cold. I hope you can hear me. As a good lawyer, I'm supposed to say I concur with everything that has been said about Dr. Naidoo and then sit down. I concur and I sit down. But yes, Dr. Sebon has saved me some time, so I'll skip some of the things that I wanted to say. It is indeed an honor for me to be delivering the 2024 Memorial Lecture. It comes at a time when we are celebrating the 30 years of democracy. So for me, it's really a big honor. And I really want to salute the family and the friends of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo for instituting this Memorial Lecture. Please keep it up and please keep doing this lecture to serve as a memory, as an example, but also as lesson for where we are and where we need to go. The theme of the lecture today is celebrating 30 years of democracy. This is a theme that the organizers chose for this lecture today, celebrating 30 years of democracy. Indeed, we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate because we have come far as a country. You know, I was taking around the documentation center now, you know, looking at the history of, you know, Indian arrival in South Africa, the conflict that we have. So we have traveled a long road in South Africa. So indeed, we must celebrate 30 years of democracy. But those of you who knew Aunt Phil, Comrade Phyllis, Mama Phyllis, Dr. Naidoo, will know that she will want us to celebrate. But she will also want us to commemorate, to observe, and to use these 30 years to reflect on where we are. She was not shy of celebrating, of course. I'm not saying she was not a celebrator. Indeed, her house in Maseru and her house in Zimbabwe were oases for celebration, houses that quenched the metaphorical thirst of exiles, refugees, allies, and so forth. So she was fond of celebrating. But also, as I said, if you know her, you will know that she will want us to use today, this 30 years of democracy, to also ask some hard questions, some difficult questions. She will want us to ask, how far are we in the journey of democratization, social justice, and a culture of human rights? Are we following on the footsteps of those who have sacrificed not only their lives, but their futures in the struggle for democracy? Of course, when I use the word footsteps, I'm referring to one of the series of books that she published, Footsteps. Have we followed those footsteps, or have we strayed away from that journey? So my purpose today is to celebrate, to commemorate, but also to reflect on these questions. The title of my talk, as you have seen, is Leruna Rebatu. Now, you will know that that title comes from one of Dr. Naidoo's books, a book published in 1992, Leruna Rebatu, an account of the 1982 Maseru massacre, Leruna Rebatu. So I've borrowed my talk, the title of my talk, from the title of that book, the 1982 massacre, Leruna Rebatu. We too are human beings. We too are human beings. So I'm borrowing this title to ask two fundamental questions, or to ask us, as we remember this memory, to focus on the two problematics that are facing us today in post-apartheid South Africa, 30 years into democracy. Leruna Rebatu, we too are human beings. The two problematics that I'm referring to are, of course, the one problematic of the ongoing project of the dehumanization of a lot of people in South Africa, the ongoing project of dehumanization, forcing a lot of people to accept that Leruna Rebatu, we too are human beings. And the related problematic of social disharmony. Hence, the subtitle of my talk is to reflect on Dr. Naidoo's vision of being togetherness, the vision of being togetherness. These two problematics, the problematic of ongoing structures, attitudes, systems of dehumanization, and the ongoing project or situation of social disharmony, are really the two twin evils that we need to confront 30 years into democracy. We can't just celebrate. We need to say, how do we answer these two problematics? Because both of them speak to the national question. Of course, it's up to ask this question here in Durban. You'll recall that in 2021, here in KwaZulu-Natal, but also in Johannesburg, 350 people lost their lives. 350 people lost their lives because of social disharmony, because of marginalization, but because of this ongoing project of not seeing other people as human beings. Leruna Rebatu, we too are human beings. As the South African Human Rights Commission, when we commemorated this anniversary of the unrest this year, we sounded a warning that the conditions that led to the 2021 unrest are still there with us. those conditions are still there with us. And we warn that unless we attend to those conditions, we will see a repeat of the 2021 unrest. 350 people killed. I want to argue that the unrest, whatever the cause, at the base of it, the root cause are the twin problematic that I'm referring to. So 30 years into democracy, a lot of things have been done well. New constitution, new institutions, an array of legislation, equality courts, but also some changes in attitudes. So we have traveled a long journey as South Africa. We have done well in certain respects. In certain respects, we really need to talk about these issues. One of them, as I said, is this project that Frantz Fanon's teacher, Ami Sisser, called it the project of thingification, making people into things. The project of thingification continues today. And the other project of social disharmony. How can we resolve these questions? I want to say that the life, the philo-praxis of Dr. Naidoo hold a lot of lessons for us. And that's what I want to focus on. So I'll skip a lot of the biography and jump, because that has already been done by Dr. Suben. Thank you so much. To focus on what lessons can we learn from the life, the example, but the philo-praxis, the way of doing politics, the philosophy of politics of Dr. Naidoo, on how do we confront and overcome these twin problematics that I want to argue that as a country, we have swept under the carpet. We are not facing them head on. How do we do that? Dr. Naidoo, in many of her books, confronted these issues. Of course, here in Durban, and this university, Border University, is also the scene where one of the greatest movement of rehumanization was formed. And of course, here I'm talking about Steve Biko and his comrade, Steve Biko, who was a medical student at the University of Natal, where 55 years ago, they started a movement of the Black consciousness. Black consciousness asking two fundamental questions, or answering to two fundamental questions. Who are you and what are you? This is a question that is posed by colonialism against everyone who is colonized. What are you and who are you? And of course, Black consciousness responded to that question by saying, we are full human beings. And number two, that we are Black students. And for them, if you remember, Black do not mean what we mean today, which is a narrow, nativist idea of Blackness. For Steve Biko and his comrades, Blackness was capacious and included so-called coloreds, so-called Indians, so-called Africans, all of them as Blacks. We are human beings, we are Black. So this university really, at its roots, at its history, has a lot to teach us. So this Biko month, which is September, as we celebrate Dr. Naidoo, as we observe Biko month, which is the month when Biko was killed, we'll do well to learn from these students the lesson about how do you counter dehumanization? How do you counter systems and infrastructures globally that seeks to relegate a group of people to the underside of humanity? We see it all over the world. So, born in 1928, which was, of course, the high period of colonialism in South Africa. 1910, South Africa, as a white man's colony, just formed. 1928, colonialism really, consolidating itself. Dr. Phyllis Naidoo prefigured in her work this notion of how do we build beloved communities. How do we build beloved communities? As I said, we see this in the work she did with ex-prisoners. In the context where no one wanted to give them jobs, she gave them jobs, including our former president, Jacob Zuma. In Maseru, in Zimbabwe, exposing herself to great risk by welcoming everyone and really forming this beloved community. A social worker, a teacher, a lawyer. She was truly an activist in the truest sense of an activist. But she was not just an activist, she was also a revolutionary. We can coin the nomenclature, activist, revolutionary. Not just an activist, but a revolutionary. You will know, Praveyachi, that we in civil society we have a lot of activists, but not really revolutionaries. Sometimes we've got revolutionaries who are not truly activists. Revolutionaries who want to take us back to the bad ways of doing things. An activist revolutionary she was. She was also, of course, a scholar, a writer, what we can call an activist scholar, meaning not just a scholar who's, content with just producing articles and articles, but a scholar who's also interested in activating consciousness. Activist intellectual. Do we still have those activist intellectuals in our universities in the current climate? What does she have to teach us? So an activist revolutionary, an activist intellectual, but lastly, a mother activist. If you read all the tributes written about her, this quality of being a mother stands out a lot. But a mother, not in a patriarchal sense, a mother in a sense of a revolutionary mother, a nurturer. This is what she says about herself when she was in Lesotho, and I quote, "At 54 years old, I was their mother, their comrade, and mostly their friend. It was a great privilege to wear all those three hats." End of quote. Professor Neocosmos, who, by the way, was my sociology master supervisor. When I was preparing for this talk and I was talking to him, I didn't know that Professor Neocosmos was one of his sons, as he put it. Met in Zimbabwe, and really Dr. Naidoo adopted Professor Neocosmos, who later on became my mentor, some cosmic harmony. She says this in his tribute to Dr. Naidoo. She was a mother to all of us. Phyllis will conjure up a tasty meal, often from leftovers of vegetables grown in her garden, and she'll mother, if not the nation itself, at least most of its genuine representatives at the time. End of quote. So Aunt Phil, as some of them fondly refer to her, was not a mother in the patriarchal sense, was a mother in a sense that we can think of someone like Harriet Tubman of the Underground Railway Road, a nurturer in that sense. To come back to the theme of my talk, Leonari Batu. She was a mother engaged in a project that in Sesotho we call a project of Go Motofatsa, to make a human again. That's what her main project was, to make human again, Go Motofatsa. So if the thesis from colonialism was dehumanization, and the antithesis was a struggle against apartheid, the synthesis that she put forward was how to make people human beings again. So this 2024 memorial lecture asks us this difficult question. In our work as individuals, as collectives, as institutions, indeed as a nation, how far are we engaged in this project of humanizing other people? How far are we engaged in this project of homo to fats? As I said, unfortunately, 30 years into democracy, we continue to see instances where a lot of people are pushed to the underside of the line of humanity. I can give you many examples, but let me start here in KZN. In KZN, as you might know, there's a social movement called Abahlali Basemjondolo. Abahlali Basemjondolo being the shack dwellers movement. Wonderful social movement. A movement indeed engaged in this project that we are talking about. Every year, on the 27th of April, Abahlali Basemjondolo, shack dwellers movement, when we are celebrating Freedom Day, they are celebrating Unfreedom Day. Or not celebrating, they mourn Unfreedom Day. Every year on the 27th of April, they mourn Unfreedom Day. Let me quote from what they wrote on the 20th anniversary of democracy. This is what they said. Let me quote. 20 years after apartheid, we live like pigs in the mud. Our children die of diarrhea. We are forced into transit camps at gunpoint. The police beat and shoot us in the streets, and the assassins kill us with impunity. This is the most important part. If we stand up and demand that our humanity is recognized, we are removed from the housing list and put on the death list, quote unquote, Abahlali Basemjondolo. You will know that Abahlali Basemjondolo has lost almost 24 leaders who have been assassinated since 2005, deep into democracy. Almost 24 of their leaders allegedly assassinated. A condition of unfreedom. Who can forget the Marikana massacre in 2012? You will remember that scene just before the massacre where the leader of the miners, Joseph Matunja, is standing in front of the miners and is kneeling down and is saying to them, please leave. These people are going to kill you, and then tomorrow they're going to just replace you. Please leave. Unfortunately, it came to pass that they were killed. Let me quote from one of the mine workers. This one of the injured mine workers said about why the strike happened. And I quote, "That is why the strike happened. We are human beings and we demand to be treated as such. I know that the world sees us as boys when it suits them and as savages when we stand up for our rights. We are simply human beings." Close quote. Leona Rebat. We too are human beings. I know that the world sees us as boys when it suits them and savages when we stand up for our rights. We are human beings. End of quote. 34 miners killed that day. Leona Rebat. We too are human beings. So 30 years into democracy, native life continues to be a life of fungibility, where you can kill and replace with impunity, according to these mine workers. According to Zbusi Gode, who is the leader of Abahlali. By the way, Facebook reminded me yesterday that I first met Zbusi Gode in 2010 here in Durban when I was doing an academic project when we were writing our book. I met him in 2010 in a safe house because they wanted to kill him. I met him a few months ago. He's still living in a safe house because his life is still in danger. From 2010, when I first met him, when I met him a few months ago, I also had to meet him in a safe house because his life is in danger. This is what he say about why marginalized people who are deemed not human beings, who are in this space of what they call unfreedom, continue to resist. They resist, and I quote, because they are pushed beneath the law, end of quote. They are pushed as if they are beneath the law. What does it mean to be treated and pushed beyond the law in the context of the most wonderful constitution in the world? What does it mean to be pushed beneath the law and to be treated as such? Another leader of Abahlali adds that a person trapped in this unfreedom is a person whose life and voice does not count, end of quote. Life and voice does not count. Abahlali therefore conclude that even under conditions of constitutionalism and democracy, and I quote, if you are poor and black, you can be killed with impunity, close quote. So native life continued to be, in the words of Abahlali, a life that doesn't count. We too are human beings. Of course, when I talk about native life, I'm borrowing from a certain book, a book written by the first General Secretary of the ANC, Solomon Tsekiso Plaki, Native Life in South Africa, a book written in 1916, but a book really focusing on the 1913 Native Land Act. It's interesting that Dr. Naidoo passes on in the 100-year anniversary of the Native Land Act. Native Land Act, enacted in 1913, Dr. Naidoo passes on in 2013. The book opens up with a quote, that book by Solomon Plaki in 1916. Let me quote the book. Awakening on Friday morning, June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. Not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. So, according to Plaki, to be a pariah was worse than being a slave. And by pariah, he meant that black people unable to buy land, unable to stay in the farms where they used to stay, were tossed out as pariahs, pushed to the margins of society. The question that we need to ask ourselves in 2024, reflecting on this book that's written in 1916, how far are we in dismantling this condition of pariahdom? How far are we in dismantling this condition of pariahdom? In one of my latest articles, I define pariahdom as a constitutive and foundational settler colonial project. Everywhere there's settler colonialism, there's a production of pariahdom that pushes indigenous people, enslaved people into conditions of unhomeliness, homelessness, namelessness, and ultimately worldlessness, to be without the world, to be pushed as if you're not part of this world. To be worthless in a settler-created context is to be a perpetual pariah, where you are faced with three choices. Number one, to accept the settler condition and to ask for assimilation. Or number two, to do nothing. Not to assimilate, but to do nothing, to hide on the edges of that society, so-called a position of liminality. And then lastly, to resist this pariahdom. Dr. Naidoo's life and lesson holds a lot of lesson on how to counter this situation of pariahdom. Native Life in South Africa, that book written in 1916, is really a wonderful book that I've prescribed for my students, because it's a book, number one, of law and sociology. It's really a book of sociology, but it's also a book of investigative journalism. Because when you read the book, Salt Plaki goes to different farms, investigating and interviewing people who have just been tossed out of their homes and then have this rich narrative to contest the stated ambitions of Native Act. I mean, listen to the name of the act, Native Land Act, as if it was beneficial to the natives. So it's a book of law and sociology. It's a book of investigative journalism. If you read Le Rona Re Batho, the book written by Dr. Naidoo in 1992, you will see that she continues this tradition of investigative journalism, of law and sociology, but ultimately of humanizing those who have been oppressed. So in the time that is left with me, let me focus on two books by Dr. Naidoo. Number one, as I said, Le Rona Re Batho, an account of the 1982 Maseru massacre. And the other book that I will choose in the interest of time is Enduring Footprints. A book came out in 2009. Those two books. Let me start with the first book, Le Rona Re Batho. In the preface, Aunt Phil writes as follows, and I'll quote, "Time has obliterated 30 comrades and 12 Basotus from collective memory. Time has obliterated 30 comrades and 12 Basotus from our collective memory. The exigencies of the present take up energy and resources, scarce commodities in the ANC. However, I want to bring these comrades to you, to stain them in our national memory, close quote. That's a stated ambition with the book. So we all know the 1982 massacre, where the South African Defence Force encroached into the sovereignty of Lesotho, looking for MK and ANC cadres, and ending up killing 42 people. I don't forget that raid because it took place on my birthday, 9th of December. I really don't forget that birthday. If you look at that book, and it's available online if you don't have a copy, what Dr. Naidoo does there is to humanize those who were killed, not just to remember them, but to humanize them. We can say she remember, but also remembers them. Two ways of remembering. Remember and then member. Member, to remember. People have been dismembered. Remember and remembering. Pictures of the dead, the maimed and injured. She took pictures in the mortuary. But also pictures of survivors, including her dog, Sasha. The book is a wonderful account of how to dismantle colonial narrative and colonial accounts of official history. It's also a book that humanizes the dead in a sense that it tells us why and how they went to exile, and also what they had for their last supper, as the two titles of one of the chapters, what they had for their last chapters. I won't go through the book. I want to argue that the significance and the brilliance of this book, a book of deconstruction and reconstruction, is that it is exemplary of this project of Homo Tofas that I've been talking about, the project of humanization. The title of the book is taken from the name of the child of a comrade who's been killed. And just before the comrade was killed, a comrade Jean, he named the child, a daughter, Le Rona Re Batho. That's the name that was given to this child. In the book, Dr. Naidoo addresses the child explicitly, and she says, I quote, "Hope you will like the name when you grow up. Indeed, your father was telling the Boers, listen, you chaps, we are also people, as indeed we are, exclamation mark. Indeed, your father was telling the Boers, listen, you chaps, we are also people, as indeed we are, end of quote. I want to argue that this book is important because it gives us 4 tactics of rehumanizing, 4 tactics of rehumanizing: to grieve, to name, to dismantle colonial discourse, but lastly, to engage in a process of epistemic disobedience. To grieve, to name, to dismantle colonial discourse, colonial official accounts, and then lastly, to engage in a counter-discourse. As I said, there's no time for me to go through the book. I'll just give you snippets of how she engages in these 4 tactics of rehumanization. Part of dehumanization is to render those who are dehumanized ungrievable. Their lives are rendered ungrievable. Of course, this is a famous book by Judith Butler, a famous feminist scholar. Judith Butler has got a book called Ungrievable, that people who have been dehumanized. And here she's talking about not just Nazi Germany, she's also talking about what's happening in Palestine, that their lives are rendered ungrievable. We've seen that here in South Africa. 350 people killed, life goes on, ungrievable. So in the first place, she counters this colonial dehumanizing strategy of ungrievability by, as she says in the title, I'm staining their memory, I'm staining them in the national memory, close quote, to grieve those who have been killed, to humanize them. Let me give you a vignette from one of the books about how she grieves those who have been killed. And here she's talking about Comrade Said. And she says, and I quote, "Those who came to murder him at midnight filled his body with, oh, so many bullets. Did not know what a gentleman he was. Hate had no part in his life. How concerned he was when anyone was ill. How gently he scooped up the pup Foster, a dog Foster, to take him home. He had a twinkle in his eye and was happy when we accidentally met in town. I wish," and he's talking to the murderers, "I wish you could have spoken to him. You have not touched a hair on his head. You blotted out that twinkle and with it a loving man. Your blighted racism has blinded you so much, and now this murderous acts cannot be undone." Close quote. So first tactic, to grieve those who are rendered ungrievable. The second one, as I said, to name those who are dehumanized, because as you know, part of the colonial context or tactic is to depersonalize people who have been killed. Listen to how Palestinians are referred to as a horde, as a mob, to dehumanize all of them. So naming becomes very, very important in this project of rehumanizing. This is how she puts it. And I quote from the preface: "Blacks, even in the new South Africa, are a nameless phenomenon. They are statistics. Some statistics leave out the majority of our people. Blacks are ghosts in our society. I try in a small way to remedy that." Close quote. So the second tactic being the one of naming. The third tactic is that she engages in this project of discrediting the official colonial account of what happened. So the third tactic is to engage in this project of confronting and dismantling colonial and neo-colonial official accounts. When the massacre happened in 1982, this is what the SNADF official account said. This is what the South African Defence Force said, and I quote, "And when you hear this account, listen how this account is similar to accounts that we are seeing in other contexts where people are massacred. Listen to this account. This is in 1982, 10th of December, after the massacre, International Human Rights Day. This is what the South African Defence Force writes. And I quote, "Elements of the Defence Force launched a successful is put in in, not built in, what is called, capitalized. Elements of the Defense Force launched a successful attack on 12 ANC targets in Maseru, Lesotho this morning. A total of about 30 terrorists were killed in the attack, and a quantity of arms, explosives, and documents were seized. Although the strike force had strict instruction to avoid women, children, and Lesotho citizens not involved with the ANC, 5 women and 2 children died in the crossfire. 4 members of the strike force were wounded in the firefights. There were no firefights. It is regretted that the innocent also had to suffer because terrorists, to discourage action against them, housed themselves inside civilians. These targets served as planning and control headquarters for the ANC, Transkei, and Ciskei, to be used as springboard for terrorist actions against South Africa. The headquarters were deliberately housed in civilian houses spread throughout the residential suburbs of Maseru to complicate action against them. Where have we had that before or currently? It is emphasized that this attack was aimed at ANC terrorists and everything possible was done to prevent contact with the Lesotho force and innocent lives. End of quote. This is the official account of the colonial apartheid state of South Africa. Did everything we could do to avoid civilians, but the terrorists house themselves with civilians. As I said, where did we hear that? This is how Dr. Naidoo counters this official narrative. Over and over again, she narrates who was in the house, why were they in the house, who were they, students, children, women not involved in these attacks. She even names the dogs that were killed, by indiscriminate throwing of grenades. By the way, let me quote something that the statement also said. This is what the statement from the SNADF said. In addition, the SNADF is also aware that the ANC regularly receives advice on the nature and extent of its activities from the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The danger therefore exists that the ANC terror activities in Lesotho could increasingly follow the pattern of the brutal violence, disregard for human life. It is known that the ANC terrorists in Lesotho were influenced by the Palestinian Liberation Organization to eliminate other black leaders. Small elements from the ANC headquarters in Lesotho have carried out this instruction. End of quote. This is how Dr. Naidoo answers this question. Is it possible that besides the arms from Israel, the Israelis in warfare trained you, SADF? Some of your methods are so similar to the mindless Israeli annihilation of young Palestinians. End of quote. 1992, Dr. Naidoo. And she goes on to show that this attack was not a success. If anything, it was a catastrophe. She says, and I quote, "By no stretch of the imagination was this raid a success. It's a godly catastrophe that has laid waste on so many lives." End of quote. So this is the third tactic that she teaches us: to discredit, to ridicule, to counter the colonizers' account. The last tactic, epistemic disobedience and a counter-discursive account, because of course the colonizers set the terms of the conflict discursively, and any conflict must take place within the confines of those conceptual terms that they do. So the project of epistemic disobedience becomes very important. Now, the way she does it is very, very interesting, Dr. Naidoo, is that she not only refused the terms and the concepts and the epistemology set by the colonizers, she also seeks to show that it is actually the colonizers who are not human beings. So if the colonizers say you are not a human being, she saw that in fact those who oppress and subjugate are themselves not human beings. Let me quote what she says here. "You release into our ranks so much antagonism. Comrades wanted to go into the country and kill any white that they could see. And these young comrades will say to Dr. Naidoo, we have no need for your politics and feel we must kill. The Boers must be taught a lesson. We should not be the only ones to cry. They must cry, their children must cry too. And she says, Dr. Naidoo, we fought back with variations of the following. Do you want to behave like a Boer? How do you avenge a death of a comrade? By killing 10 Boers? What are you saying? 1 Zolanqini, 10 Boers. Never. Don't let the Boers make Boers of us. Yes, we must avenge their deaths, but how? How to avenge the death is our question. To continue our struggle for a democratic South Africa, they will have died in vain if we give up the struggle and become common murderers. If we were in the struggle to change their murderous regime to a more humane society, there's no better example than the lives of our foreign comrades. Their lives have been lived with distinction, and we have to follow their example. If we do this, we shall have given their lives meaning. We shall have avenged their deaths. And she says, so while you disinformed, we suffered some casualties, we came out stronger in our commitment to struggle for justice, for peace, and for democracy. It is you who lost your humanity. End of quote. So the 1992 book, Logonaribatu, teaches us what I say are the 4 tactics of countering dehumanization: to grieve, to name, to discredit the colonial account, and to engage in a counter discourse. Those 4 tactics put together towards a strategy of building a humane society. How much time do we have? 5 minutes. Okay, I'll skip some of the things. Let me jump to the last book, Enduring Footprints, which came out in 2009. She was 82 years old then. She says in the preface, I want to put into tapestry called The Struggle a few more names in this let me start. I want to put into the tapestry called Struggle a few more names in this issue of enduring footprints. I've planned not to tell the stories that the media tell of our icons. So she's engaged in this project of celebrating those unsung, unknown heroes in this book. One of the reviewers of the book summarizes this humanizing and reclamation of dignity that Dr. Naidoo was involved in. And I quote, throughout Phyllis Naidoo's writings, there's a tacit democratic principle at work. Anyone, established icon or not, of any race or social grouping, is given space if they've earned the right through their life and example to champion the cause of freedom. They are all part of the community of liberation heroes and heroines that she set up in their writings. We tend to separate those who were sent to Robben Island as the ultimate heroes from those who went into exile. However, in Naidoo's writings, there are many other categories of heroes and heroines. Names are important in Dr. Naidoo's work as she tirelessly counters the political amnesia that marks our present time. So this book, and end of course, this book is interesting because here she extends this project of being togetherness to the ontotritic community. The ontotritic community meaning the community not just made of the community of the community of the living dead, and the yet to be born. She brings them in this community because we tend to only focus on the living. This is how she puts it. So she acknowledges a few comrades and then she says, the above living friends and comrades are those that have come to my degenerating mind, but there are many more. The many dead, our ancestors, my peers, have also contributed so much to this book. So even those who have passed away have contributed a lot to this book. There are children who have persistently nagged our footsteps daily, and we acknowledge and thank them. So thanking also the children and the yet to be born, an ontotritic community, which in Ubuntu, as you know, that's what constitutes being togetherness. The living dead, the yet to be born, and the non-human animals. In the interest of time, I will just summarize what this book does in this project of humanization. 3 things. Number 1, she counters the depersonalization through many names. And a lot of those vignettes are very short. Some people are shopkeepers. She names dentists. Some of them are heroes like Dennis Brutus and so forth. Short narratives, very, very important. But number 2, she's engaged in what we can call a counter-archiving project. A counter-archiving project. This project is important because in the context of the struggle, only a few heroes are remembered. So she is engaged in the project of counter-archiving to bring to fore those who are not celebrated. But lastly, she's engaged in what we can call a Creole sensibility. She does this by a process of intertextuality. So it's a book, she gives narratives, but she also borrows from other books. Intertextuality. This shows the confidence as a writer that I'm not the first one to say this, and I can refer other people. We don't do that enough in academia. We claim to be the originators of thoughts. So this project of intertextuality is important because it pushes forward the project of interculturality, the project of pluriversality, away from universality to pluriversality, and ultimately this project of being togetherness. Once again, this book is online, and I encourage you to find that book. Let me summarize by leaving you with 3 lessons from the work and philopraxis of Dr. Naidoo. The first lesson is that she offers us a way of doing decoloniality. I know here at UKZN we are also engaged in this project of decoloniality. But I'm afraid that this project is in a cul-de-sac, very cul-de-sac. We are not saying anything new anymore since 2015, 2016. But secondly, this project of decoloniality is engaged in what I call nativism. Nativism. If Biko and his comrades were engaged in a capacious idea of blackness, we have retreated to a very narrow idea of blackness. We have retreated to funny discourses of native discourses. That decoloniality is about retrieving native discourses. Doesn't make sense. The native only comes into being when the settler arrives. How can that be your goal, to retrieve native discourse? So the work of Dr. Naidoo, through deep archive, through her capacious example of being with a lot of people, does the work of decoloniality without falling into this trap of the cul-de-sac that I'm talking about. Secondly, more broadly, the life of Dr. Naidoo teaches us how to do politics. How do we do politics? She teaches us that if the means and the ends of our politics are not guided by Ubuntu, by humaneness, then we ourselves also become colonialists. You have seen it in many contexts where leaders of the struggle tomorrow become neo-colonial leaders. It is because the means and the ends of the struggle are not guided by Ubuntu, what Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen master, will call the project of interbeing, the project of interbeing. Let me cite from one of her children, Professor Neo Cosmos, and I'll quote, "Her humanity guided her political principles. There could be no politics for her in the absence of commitment to humanity. Politics without principles was a contradiction in terms, and such principles meant a total commitment to equality, not in the future, but as an ideal every day now." End of quote. So to prefigure the project of beloved communities, even under the harshest conditions of colonialism, because if we don't do that, the way we do politics also become colonial, also become racist, also become sexist, also become patriarchal, even as we claim to be fighting those evils. Lastly, She teaches us that even under the harshest conditions, there is no excuse from forging this project of beloved community. That even in the harshest conditions, not an excuse to postpone this project of, the beloved communities. You'll remember that she was 24 years in exile. By 24 years, I mean 10 years banned to her house, and then 14 years in exile. So effectively, 24 years in exile. And throughout that time, receiving the love of the community, but also herself giving love to community for 24 years until she came back. Even after she came back, living on an MK pension, not wanting to go to parliament and to be a politician and so forth. This is what she says about her time of forging this beloved community, even under the harshest conditions. And I quote, "What was denied me in my country, South Africa, was afforded me in Lesotho, in exile. I was grouped areaed at home, grouped areaed under the Group Areas Act. Here in Lesotho, we lived as human beings should. We worked together, we lived together, we played together, we cried together when and if the need arose. These were the precious memories that the Mountain Kingdom afforded us." Close quote. So we celebrate the life of Dr. Naidoo, not to monumentalize it, but to memorialize it. I salute the organizers of this memorial lecture. I salute the family and friends of Dr. Naidoo, and the lesson that she holds for us are lessons that are truly enduring. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. There's just a few words that ring in my mind throughout the course of this lecture. We too are human beings. Homots of us, to make a human being again, humanizing other people, recognizing our humanity. So when you walk out of this room, at least those words should ring clear in your mind. So thank you, Professor, for taking us through a remarkable journey. You took us all the way back to 1973 to the Durban moment, the birth of black consciousness. You took us to the Marikana massacre. You took us to the Shack Dwellers Association. You made us engage with these questions. Who are you and what are you? How do you build beloved communities? And I think you distilled so well the books that Phyllis Naidoo wrote, the tactics of rehumanizing. How do we engage in decoloniality? How do you do politics? And how do you build beloved communities? And finally, the words that you opened with, that we must commemorate, that we must observe, and that we must reflect. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And as I sit here, I have a very nice vantage point of looking at all of you and watching the curiosity in all of your faces, and it was quite pleasing to see such a receptive audience and to thank you for being here. But I want to now invite this audience, if you have any questions for the professor, if I can open the floor for that. We do have a roving mic, Professor, if you'd be happy to take a few questions. So I'm sure that you might have some thoughts or remarks or questions. Yes, let's go ahead. There is a button that you can press for your microphone. Okay.
Sanbonan Bazulana Bam Melang Assalamu alaikum Pram Namaste Bargan Melang Dr. Phyllis Naidoo. I will make a comment. I'm not going to ask an obvious question because I did work with my leader, Dr. Phyllis Naidoo. I was also charged with her brother, the late attorney Paul David, and her brother-in-law, MJ Naidoo. In full, we call it Murikia Chirandra Naidoo. He is the brother to the late MD Naidoo, the husband of the late husband of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo. Dr. Phyllis Naidoo Bandabamba Zukulana was working closely, cooperatively with the late co-accused of mine, attorney Kumete, in corner of Bond Street, corner of Bond Street and Short Street. And they were co-directors of the firm of attorney. It was called Phyllis Naidoo and Kumete, former firm of attorneys in Kabanabane. So, yes, we were during the struggle. We knew one another. We used to pay a visit to each other or one another. This bravura you are trying to relate to Mpanwam, Tina, we did not just monitor or see it, but we felt it. Yabona bina get one. I had 11 or Section 6. You know, Section 6 is trial, detention without trial. But I'm telling you, I'm a punu now. They are bad. So, let's say, ye shall cover. But to the Wunya. Kulajom Talangi, Colin, Kulmikanisuli, Colalisin. But to the Wunya. Ye shall cock. Not to take much of tea. Yabana Jagga Kerala, bringing in Kal, snake can. When they Kerala Pele socially long. When they put you, they black some, the donor you black some. Fanaga, we are corner, Nabon. You must go to a corner. When we are at a corner, no one is coming from either left or right. They must face you. And then things happen. Zakala, Azkali. And then there's a Islam. Utamus like a piece of bomb. He shall cock. Gapela, Gagwenzek. You know, when Walter Passon came to kill us, Minaga famine, I died for 2 days. No, serious. I died for 2 days. Best faga ama chemical warfare of Walter Passon, putting those chemical warfare in the back faga gas, electricity, and you back. And that thing is so powerful. And the nuclear land, but gas electricity can uplift you from the chair. Utlands corner naked. Puna. Naked, Matabam. Hey, it's not a joke. I mean it, Matabam. It happened. It's not just a joke. Kuluma, you know. Hey! I'm telling you. Then I'm naked. Ufike cold water, ice cold water, ishayela ekhanda la. And then the one inkanyezi will see some stars yabona on your face. Then you don't know what's going on your body. The chair that you were sitting on is no longer with you. I said, stand. It's down there. You were sitting on it, and there's nothing that is uplifting you. But you come up, they press the electricity there. This thing uplifts you. Uhambe moyeni, famba moyeni. Ufamba moyeni. Uhambe undize. And then, but your legs are just like you are still sitting. You are just like sitting. Yet there's no chair behind you. But you can feel you're still on the chair. But chair nahi hai, kalas ho gaya, kuch nahi hai. Chair nahi hai, asif.
Okay, on that one, Numzan, thank you very much for your comments.
Let me close the Goba.
Thank you.
It will be unfair if I'm not closing. To close the quote, I saw, before I died, I saw a polony on the foot. I say, because I was hungry, I say, Ubalo Begelo polony. They turned that thing around without my permission. When I looked at the polony, I said, yeah, I was a so she'll win what on your bush. So I want that part to be captured. And then to leave that, the part is painful. The lady, Dr. Phyllis Naidoo, wahamba barefooted, barefooted. Ehamba ngeenyawo, ufike inyawo zivuvuke kuyinkinga elisuthu. So ngoba I'm not here giving lecture, I was only giving a testimony because I was with her and I was arrested with her brother-in-law, with high treason. I'm one of the 16 high treason trialists. I was accused number 15. I thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Numzan, for your comments. And it's good to have actually had a freedom fighter in our midst and to give us that testimony. So thank you very much for that. Prof, do you have any remarks on that? Okay. Maybe just one more round of questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. It was a very interesting talk. My concern is that we dwell too much on colonialism as a comfortable, a safe boogeyman that doesn't actually implicate us deeply. My concern is that even as the Human Rights Commission, we've got a serious problem around cultural chauvinism, which is dehumanizing us across the board. Throughout, once cultural chauvinists get going, nobody meets that standard. And I feel that there's a trick that we're missing in the work of the Commission, not to meet this thing head on. I've seen this concerns with the report on the riots and the way it was dealt with by the Commission. I think it was a failure by the Commission to attack cultural chauvinism as it was nakedly displayed by all the parties responsible on both sides. I think nativism is a neat term for academic circles, but its form is rough out there on the streets, and it's going to cause the downfall of our national project. Thanks.
I think I can take one more question and then hand over to the Prof to reply.
No, just to start to say thank you to Baba for Dr. General Kikia. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that testimony with us. As you said, you Yes, you felt it. You didn't read about it. Thank you so much. The cultural chauvinism, I tried to allude to part of that. You might not disagree with the concept, but I tried to allude to some of that. The cul-de-sac of decoloniality, the retreating into a narrow conception of race, of culture, of religion. So that is important. So what we did as a Human Rights Commission, a report can never capture everything. There were 2 reports, one from the South African Human Rights Commission, the other report from the Commission for Cultural and Religious Linguistic Minorities, 2 separate reports. So I won't comment on the other one. What we did as a commission is to set up an initiative called SHINE, Social Harmony Through National Effort. So SHINE is our contribution to say, you can do an investigation, you can charge people, you can make recommendation, but unless you attend to social disharmony, what you call cultural chauvinism and tribalism, whatever you want to call it, then as we say, we're in deep trouble. So that project of SHINE, Social Harmony Through National Efforts, is really our contribution to trying to bring this social harmony, And part of it we say is about, number one, maybe lack of understanding. People don't know each other across the aisle. Number 2, maybe attitudes that have been formed long time ago that have been allowed to sediment of the other, them, and us. Very, very problematic. And then finally, how do we build communities where people get to know each other? So our last SHINE project was last week here in KZN, and we are busy with other ones throughout the country. But I agree with you. That's why I alluded to it. Frantz Fanon talks about that from tribalism, we go to xenophobia. From xenophobia, full-blown neocolonialism, where everything goes to shit, as he puts it. So it's very, very serious. We as a commission were saying it is not enough to investigate individual complaints. How do we come up with a systemic project to attend to social harmony? In my office, we've got different offices, I've set up a committee of advisors to advise me on 2 different things. One, a committee on the national question. What is the national question? How do we forge a nation? And that committee, some people are from this province. The other project is my friends don't like it, on diversity sensitization. How do we understand each other as diverse nations? And how do we ensure that we don't offend, we don't retreat into tribalism, but we get to know each other? So those are some of the contributions, not just individual investigation, but systemic interventions. But once again, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
So I'm appreciative of everyone's time. It's been about 2 hours, but I think given that we have this lecture once a year, the 2 hours of discussion was well spent. And I want to acknowledge you as a wonderful audience, and perhaps we can continue some of the discussions outside. To bring this proceeding to a close, I'd like to invite our Director of Library Services, Dr. Nhlanhla Ngobo, to give a short vote of thanks, and we'll bring this evening's session to a close. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As we come to the close of the 2024 Dr. Phyllis Naidoo Memorial Lecture, it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks. First and foremost, we'd like to extend our deepest gratitude to our esteemed keynote speaker, Commissioner Tsepo Madlingozi. Your address today was not only informative, but also profoundly inspiring. You brought to life the legacy of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo, highlighting her unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and education. Thank you for sharing your insights and wisdom with us. Your words have sparked important conversations that will resonate well beyond this event. To all of you who joined us today, including the members of the university executive, our line manager is here, Prof. Neil Kurpanali, faculty and staff, students, and our esteemed guests, thank you so much for your presence and your participation. Your support is invaluable, and it enriches our community. It is heartening to see so many engaged individuals committed to honoring Dr. Phyllis Naidoo's legacy and continuing her work in meaningful ways. We'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the essential contributions of all support services staff who made today's event possible. From the logistics team to our technical staff, the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center Advisory Committee, the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center staff, your hard work behind the scenes ensured that everything ran very smoothly this afternoon. As we reflect on today's discussions and the ideas that were shared, let us carry forward the spirit of inquiry and commitment to social justice that Dr. Naidoo embodied. Together, let us strive to make a difference in our communities inspired by her legacy. Thank you once again to all of you for making this event a success. We look forward to seeing you at the future lectures and events. And as we are going to disperse and travel back to our homes, travel safely and enjoy the rest of the afternoon and evening. Thank you.